On behalf of the class of 1974, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the third of our class reunion-sponsored seminars, and you're going to hear a really good program this morning. To introduce the program today, I'd like to introduce the Vice President of the class of 1974, back for more activities after having previously been the immediate past President of the class, Editor-in-Chief of our incredible class book, the amazing Grace Payne-Terzian.
I love having the honor of introducing this program where our extraordinary classmate, Lynel Horne will be interviewed by another outstanding classmate, her longtime friend, colleague, and award-winning documentary filmmaker, Paul Stekler. Paul asked me to, yes, we'll do a little, thank you. Paul asked me to fill you in on Lynel's background, so allow me to describe just some of her brave acts of humanitarianism. Now at Williams, Lynel was studious and quiet and fun, but her bold streak could be seen in her rowing. She was on the first women's rowing team, and amazingly enough, she still rows competitively. So that's a good one, right? And now, not long after Williams, when you and I were sorting out safe careers, Lynel was a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo for 2 years in a remote mountain village teaching English, science, and health. She went on to be a UN volunteer in a Bataan refugee camp in the Philippines, and then on to the Laos-Thai border, leading to her career in working with refugees and migrants. In the midst of this, she earned a doctorate at Stanford and then returned to northeast Thailand to live and work with Hmong and Lao refugees, writing a book about the impact of long-term refugee camp life. In fact, she has published 3 other books, including one on women's struggles with HIV and AIDS. But more, in the 1990s, as a Johns Hopkins Fellow at the Agency for International Development, Lynel was one of 2 women on the Clinton European Command Team to investigate and advise on the U.S. government's response to the Balkans War. Her particular focus was the imperative to address trauma and human rights violations and to treat rape as a weapon of war. She opened the Population Council's office in Hanoi, where she addressed reproductive and maternal child health, as well as a growing HIV crisis in Vietnam. Lynel returned to Sarajevo as chief of mission for the International Organization for Migration to organize resettlement of 500,000 Bosnian refugees. And she worked in Cairo during the 2011 Egyptian Revolution as chief of party for USAID's program to prevent violence against women and children. And she took on short assignments around the world for the European Commission, German government, State Department, and various international organizations. And somehow, in the midst of all this, she married and raised 2 wonderful daughters, whom she credits with inspiring her to help women and children in crisis. Her current work is focused on HERA, which stands for Her Economic Rights and Autonomy, an organization she founded in 2005 to help trafficked women. And in 2010, HERA expanded its work to support women entrepreneurs in Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine to prevent trafficking and sustain communities during conflict and hard times. My beautiful yellow scarf was actually made by a HERA entrepreneur. So these are the kinds of grants that they give out, the micro grants to help these women in these areas of crisis. Now, Paul works with Lynel as a board member and active participant of HERA. He has a doctorate in American politics from Harvard, and for more than 2 decades taught filmmaking at the University of Texas. His documentaries about American politics and history have won multiple Emmys, airing on PBS and other outlets. He is also the co-author of Killing Custer, that was a New York Times notable book of the year. So now, I'd like to play you a very short video put together by Paul and Lynel that illustrates the amazing paths of her life, her valuable life, showing what one woman can do. I think we can be very proud of our 1974 classmates, Lynel and Paul. Thank you.
The intangibles gained at Williams are what I most remember and made my life richer for it. Joining the Williams 74 class as a woman was an adventure that set me up for more. Being the only woman and the minority in the room proved to be a useful life skill. Collaborating and not being afraid to compete are gained in the boat. Seeing the humanity in someone very different from me and recognizing their pain, courage, and wisdom are not just learned in the classroom. Questioning our own judgments, assumptions, and truths by deeply examining the wisdom of philosophers was one of Gaudino's many gifts to generations of students. Recognizing that nothing is accomplished alone without respect for other perspectives and experiences was a critical negotiation skill gained on our senior thesis team. Realizing that I can't change the historic forces beyond my control, but I can affect the moment, honors a Williams education. Revering the outdoors and moments of solitude were experienced during a midnight hike up Pine Cobble before the first snows melted. Never expecting or taking it for granted to be married for 39 years, staying friends so long with Williams classmates, or attending this 50th reunion, but here we are.
Okay, I get to start this, and then Paul's. Oh, I thought the microphone worked, if I don't even have to touch it.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me back there? Okay, good. Oh, okay. All right. Can you hear me better now? Okay. All right. As Grace said, I should probably admit to you the last time I spoke to a Williams audience, it was for our senior thesis. I dressed up as a gangster mall, and I was with four Williams men who are some of you are probably in this audience, so if you are, thank you for being here. And they carried violins, and we spoke on our senior thesis on organized crime, which actually was a thesis that helped me a lot in my work ahead, but yeah. I think I was more nervous then than I am now. I was so nervous that because of how I was dressed, mainly, that I took a quarter of a Valium. Anyhow, I want to thank Grace and all the women, the committee of women and others who invited me to speak. It's such an honor. And to Paul and his colleagues for putting the film together and for his just friendship for making this work. And I also want to thank Joe Mulholland for the music, and to everyone, all of you, for coming today. It's just such a pleasure to see you. For this event, I went to different places to recapture different fragments of my life. So I found some of the photos in the basement in Boston, some others in a garage in Washington, D.C., and then some in our Sancerre living room. That's where I found the Williams rowing photo. That was quite interesting. In the trunk we have there, and my kids said, put the stuff all back in the trunk. Yeah. And then the last thing I found a few in a box in London, but not much. Anyhow, it was quite a journey, and I want to thank Grace and Paul for trying to introduce some coherence in my life. And for also giving me a bit of a reckoning about where and what next. Thank you.
No, it's when I take a look at what Lynel has done during her life, it's an honor and it's really humbling to talk to her about her career. What we've tried to do over here is to organize questions that lead you through her life, but also leads directly to the organization that she founded back in 2005, her Economic Rights and Autonomy, which I'm really honored to be a board member of. So that's the questions we're going to go through. And then I got to tell you that having been her roommate before she went, I think, for the first time to the Philippines, and then visiting her in Hanoi, and then going all around the Republic of Georgia as we were evaluating different programs to fund, which was really a pretty amazing experience. The most amazing thing I can say about having seen Lynel during all this time was going to a Thai restaurant just north of Washington Square Park, where the waitress came over and Lynel began ordering in perfect Thai, and the waitress dropped her pad. So let me start going right to the start of Lynel's post-Williams College career. You were a UN volunteer in the Philippines, dealing with refugees, Vietnamese refugees, and eventually on the Thai, Cambodian border. But you tell a story in the Philippines about rescuing a boatload of Vietnamese refugees off the Thai coast, an event that made you see things in a very different light from that time on. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I had worked as a UN volunteer for a year, basically preparing Southeast Asians, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotians, and Hmong for life in the United States. And at the end of that year, I decided that it would be really useful to see the first asylum camps when they were coming across the border. So I had some time, I had a bit of a vacation, and it was Christmas time. So first I took a little bit of time off to go to an island off the Thai coast, Gao Samet. And probably some of you have been there. It's a really lovely tourist island now. But anyhow, what I did was, as I was boarding the ferry to go to Gao Samet, I met a UN official who gave me his card when we were talking about what it was to work with the refugees. He was from UNHCR, UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And then I headed on the boat to Gao Samet, and I met a bunch of other refugee relief workers, and it was a lot of fun. And one of the British guys who was there and I decided to walk around to the other side of the island. As we walked around to the other side of the island, we saw a bunch of Thai police pushing off a boatload of some 50 Vietnamese. And they were trying to get them, basically sending that boat right back out to sea. About half of the boatload were children. So the guy and I, the British man and I, we went up to the police and we said, "Stop, we're UN officials," which of course we were not. "You are breaking international humanitarian law." They sort of looked at us. One guy spoke English and was translating. And by the way, we will take charge of these people. Well, to their credit, they actually seemed quite relieved that we showed up, because I'm sure it was very hard for them to be pushing, into doing what their government wanted them to do, which was to push these people off the coast. So I then gave the card of the UN official to the man the British man, and he went off with the police chief while I stayed with some 50 refugees and the other Thai police, looking very stern as I could. It was pretty hard in tourist clothes, and basically waiting until the UNHCR people came. The other thing, they had said, "Okay, we will let these people stay, but we'll put them in jail." There was no way that they were going to fit in the local jail, so we said, no, they have to go to the refugee camp. So that's basically what happened. That was for me, I remember thinking, wow, this is really the way to spend Christmas. This is where being there really mattered. And many years later, actually in April 2022, I had the privilege of spending Easter with a bunch of the Ukrainian women that we helped come from Donbass to France, and they stayed in our house for a few months until they found their own housing. And I think that was also the best way anybody could spend an Easter. But I think what I learned from that and what really influenced me later on was being there, having a kind of work that matters, where you show up really matters, meant a lot to me.
Your time in Bosnia and Macedonia, on the other hand, was working in war zones, one of the many conflicts that you've been close to on the Thai-Laotian border, the Cambodian borders, Khartoum, Mozambique, Cairo during the short-lived revolution, South Sudan, Northeast Nigeria. It's kind of an amazing list. Can you talk about the experiences of working in a war zone? Because this is, part of your journey in terms of dealing with different issues. So what was it? You've got stories about that.
Okay, well, I'd like to start with a bit of an overview of why one goes into or ends up in war zones. In my case, being in a conflict situation has often happened very fast and unexpectedly, partly because I was working on borders a lot with my work with migrants and refugees, and also in so-called frozen conflicts, be it Armenia and Azerbaijan, or on the eve of uprisings in the Philippines and Egypt. And I have told Ellen Oxfeld she can not laugh at this, but there are also times when I have knowingly walked into a live conflict situation in Bosnia during the war, or in Boko Haram territory in northeast Nigeria, mainly because I thought I could do something useful. I would say in any conflict situation, whether you're backing into it or you're going straight in, there is an incredible immediacy of every sense of your body being totally alive. And I think that's the addiction of war zones. And you feel completely alive because the alternative is quite clear. Anyhow, there is that adrenaline rush that you get, both in the moment and after, when you realize, wow, I made it safely. And hopefully you manage to get something done. But I also think there's something very illogical and wrong about courting danger when not necessary. And Anthony Lloyd, the writer and journalist, was quite clear about the insanity of it all when he wrote, "Oh, my war, I love it so." I think these events can only be justified when one can seriously make a difference and or document the abuses, as many journalists do, such as Lloyd, the late Marie Colvin, or those in their own country, mainly local journalists, are doing now. So I'd like to give two stories about what happened, one when I was backing into a conflict, and another when I was going straight into a conflict, to give a sense of what the differences are, but also how you feel in those moments. The first one happened about 3 years ago. I was with my husband and an Armenian woman, and we were going to the border of Iran to see the situation with some of our grantees who had applied for their ventures, and they were living in this very remote area on the border of Iran. And we went down there, and we had some really great visits, but the ride down was torturous and horrible. And a couple of times I thought, oh, we're going to go over the edge of these mountains. So when I learned from some people coming through that region and who said that, oh, there's another route back, you can go to it. It borders Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, we had been working in Nagorno-Karabakh until the conflict with Azerbaijan really got started, and then we couldn't work there anymore. But I knew the boundary lines, or so I thought. And I thought, okay, this other route is much better. So I was driving, and the Armenian friend was sitting in the back seat, and all of a sudden there's a sign, "You are entering Azerbaijan." And I was like, oh no. And you couldn't go back at this point because there was no time, the roads were awful. And I look in the rearview mirror and I see the look of terror on that Armenian woman's face. I have never driven so fast in my life. I went through the Azeri territory, and all of a sudden there were Russian helicopters overhead. I knew at that moment that there was about to be some open warfare if the Russian helicopters were there. So I went even faster. And my husband was like, wait a minute, we're going to die by your driving. I go, we got to get out of here. Anyhow, so when we saw the Armenian sign, "You are entering Armenia," I kept thinking, oh my God, I hope this is the border. Well, it was, thank God. But for me, it was backing into something where I put somebody else's life in danger and it wasn't necessary. So I felt really badly about it, but we made it, thank God. And another situation which Paul has asked me to talk about was where I knowingly went into a conflict zone. And in that case, it was I was asked by the head of, the chief of mission for a U.S. Agency for International Development in Macedonia. She wanted to go on a summer holiday, so she said, Lynellyn, you're in charge of all the humanitarian programs we have, which is most of my budget, so come down here and you can be the chief of mission for 2 or 3 weeks. I thought, okay, fine, I'll do that. It'll be interesting. Anyhow, so I went down and I thought, well, wait a minute, I can't really see most of the humanitarian aid we're giving because it's in Kosovo. So I talked to CARE because they were in charge of the project that we were giving money to, which was a soap-making project in Pristina. So I basically went to the CARE people and said, hey, can I go over and to Kosovo for a day and see the soap making? They said, sure, fine. So then I went to the State Department security officer. I said, I'm going to Kosovo tomorrow. He goes, okay, tell me about it when you get back. So I said, okay. So I got on I waited in the morning. I was waiting for the CARE people. They came and they said, you have to take an embassy card to the border. I said, okay, take an embassy card. And we're not going with you. I said, but we have somebody on the other side to meet you. I was like, okay. So I got to the border, and it was pretty scary going through the border as an American. I was like kind of fudging it a bit, saying, well, I'm just going over to some aid. I'm, working with CARE. I didn't tell them I was chief of mission at that. I was the acting aid rep at that point. Anyhow, so I got through the border, and this guy meets me on the other side who's a CARE official. He's, thank God, Kosovar, who used to be with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He spoke several languages. He was tall, big, and looked really impressive, thank God. And he says to me, look, but he had this really ramshackle car. I was wondering if we were going to make it to Pristina. And he says to me, if we are stopped along the way by Serbian militia, you are not to open your mouth. So I said, okay. So sure enough, we've gone about 30 kilometers down the road, and we're stopped. I was terrified. These soldiers come up, and I knew what they had done to women in other parts of the world. In other parts of the former Yugoslavia. So I didn't say a word. I acted very like I didn't know anything. I was just there as a, appendage to this guy. He handled it beautifully. And then we got back in. He didn't say anything for a few moments, and then he said to me, that was really close. So then he said, then we were going along a bit further, and he says, oh, by the way, before you can see the soap projects, you have to meet Rugova. Now, luckily, I'd done my homework, because as you probably know, Rugova became the first president of Kosovo. But anyhow, I knew a fair amount about Rugova. So when I thought, okay, this will be interesting. So when I was taken to see him, I basically was really very honored because of all that he had done to keep the Kosovar resistance together and the kind of the country alive. But I realized that people were listening to our conversation very closely. So I switched into French with him. And I said, I understand you studied with Merleau-Ponty at the Sorbonne. He goes, yes. I said, well, I studied linguistics. Let's speak in linguistic terms. He said, I agree. That's a good idea. So we spoke through signs and symbols for quite a while, and the CIA officer shows up. So I was like, oh, no, And Rugova says to me in French very quickly, goes, you better get out of here, because if he's shown up, that means the Serbians know you're here. Get out of here now. So we drive back, the same guy, and he said, I know you don't have time to see the soap projects, but it's okay. They're fine. I said, I believe you. So anyhow, so the Serbian guy drives me back. The Kosovar Ministry of Foreign Affairs, very tough-looking guy, drives me back. And he goes, we can't get back fast enough. He says, I'm sure the border's getting word about you. So we get to the border, and they say, they're checking me through, and they say, oh, we've got a telephone call. He goes, come on, just check her through. They check me through. We get to the other side, and the guys are coming out with guns. So I was very lucky. But, okay, there's a good side to this story where I became useful. A week and a half later, the Congress decided if I could go in there, they could send a congressional delegation to go look at the soap projects. And so it was useful.
You know, Lynel used to tell me stories about what it was like to live in Sarajevo then, and just your day-to-day existence over there. I'd just be listening going, this is pretty amazing. This is, you know, when people were still, you know, getting killed from sniper fire down from the ski slopes in the Olympics. It's, you know, but after a while you wanted to get out of a conflict situation into a post-conflict situation. And you talk about what you learned in Vietnam, dealing with reproductive rights and women's health care, and where we also organized this amazing Seder back when I visited. Post-war Bosnia, resettling refugees, and in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, where we ended up traveling years later and setting up community investment funds. What was it like going from conflict zones to non-conflict zones, but obviously areas that had very, very serious issues to deal with?
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned Bosnia, and I do have to bring the daughters in at one point. I wasn't planning to do this, but...
Well, those are the stories that freaked me out when your daughters were there.
I mean, the first day I arrived as chief of mission of the International Organization for Migration, the unexploded ordinances exploded in front of our mission. So I had to wonder what I was doing bringing my daughters to Bosnia, even though it was supposedly post-conflict, and there were many people from the European international organizations there. And I have to say also, my daughter, as she loves to tell people, she learned to ski because what's the guy? Karadzic and his militia showed up at the international this ski slope that had been used for the Olympics. And I couldn't leave her down there with all these guys with guns, so I made her go up to the top of the lift with us. And so she said, she went from one side to the next, falling down all the way, but anyhow. But then I realized there was yellow tape on either side, so I told her, you have to fall down sooner. So, yeah, we'll talk about my kids sometime later. It's been a tough one for them, I think. I can say that I began working on post-conflict situations in Bosnia as chief of mission for the International Organization for Migration. And during the war, I really bought it hook, line, and sinker that this wasn't a religious war, but that religious differences were used to inflame a conflict by the politicians, particularly Milosevic and Karadzic. However, post-war, and then post-war, the mission that I was overseeing was made up of 3 different offices in different zones. And so most of my job was really mediating between the different religious groups, just getting them to work together. So I had to get Muslims to talk to Orthodox, and I had to get the Orthodox to talk to the Catholics. It was quite an experience, because every time there would be a disagreement, I go, wait a minute, they don't really disagree about the reality here. They're disagreeing about something else. It's what they're not saying. And what I realized is that I faced much the same issue later in Egypt between the Coptic Christians on my team and also the Muslim staff members. But when I oversaw a program there, but you can get people to really sit down and to talk to one another. And I think it really takes respecting and bringing them together to solve a common problem that they all recognize, and also respecting the trauma that they each had experienced. So I really listened to a lot of that. That was really important to understand that they had been through an incredible amount. And I think one of the things that helped me the most in Bosnia was that I had seen the live conflict, so they took me seriously, that I could understand and empathize a little bit. I certainly couldn't understand it to the level that they had experienced. And in Bosnia and Egypt, we worked on trafficking and irregular migration and helping vulnerable groups, and I think especially single mothers, elderly, and children. And it was really cool to see both the Muslim guys and the Coptic Christian helping a bunch of street children at this center, and they would all play, well, we would say football, but soccer together. And they really got into these children and helping them, and they also started really working well together. We also worked on refugee returns, land and housing issues, and I have to say that land is always the biggest issue. That's really tough. And I have absolutely no illusion that we can resolve much in our lifetime, because when I went to Vietnam, that was 30 years after the war, and there were still the scars and trauma of war there. The costs of war are really intergenerational, and I really think they take years and generations to recover, which is why I always hope that war should be really the last option, and really people should learn how to negotiate. On a positive note, I met and worked with Fred Cooney. Now, probably most of you don't know who this man is, but he was really an extraordinary human being. A book was written about him, which was called The Man Who Tried to Save the World. And he was assassinated on Putin's orders during his work in Chechnya, as he exposed the selling of atomic material to Pakistan. I met and collaborated with Fred in Sudan and again in Bosnia, and he taught me in very concrete terms the Chinese proverb that a crisis is an opportunity riding a dangerous wind. He observed and wrote that following a war or a natural disaster, people and societies have the opportunities to reconstruct their lives differently and better, and that's what he would often work for. And that's, for me, why it was really important to work in post-conflict situations. We certainly witnessed that in the Hera women, in the Hera work.
I think this all leads to the founding of your nonprofit, Her Economic Rights and Autonomy in 2005. You know, personally, Lynel and I traveled around the Republic of Georgia, God, it must have been 4 years ago. Seems like an eternity, a long time ago. You know, checking out different small businesses that were owned by, that were run by women. Going to the Azerbaijan border, up that valley. Remember the valley that what they said was the Harvard Graduate School for Islamic militants in Syria?
That was in Georgia, yes, yes.
That was actually amazing. It was right on the Chechnya border. And then we went down to the Black Sea. But it was an amazing experience in that we gave small grants to women, and we'd give them a computer, money for a computer, or money for a sewing machine, and they would just start crying and hugging us, because this would allow them to be able to hire 2, 3, 4 people. No, it's just an amazing organization. And it also, you know, because this deals with people that have been trafficked, with people that are trying to become entrepreneurs, you know, wide-ranging amount of things. Can you talk about some of the women that you've worked with and the enterprises that you've helped to fund with Hera?
Okay, well, I will start with, Hera was first started in Belgrade, and and we did pretty well. We got IFC to help us get some trainers to help women who had been trafficked become entrepreneurs or find a good job. Some of them, one was a doctor, for example. Well, she just got back into medicine, thank God. But anyhow, so we started in Belgrade, and then the Serbian government declared that there was no trafficking in their country, which was an absolute farce, but there's tons. And that was kind of the center point for a lot of trafficking from Central and Eastern Europe. But anyhow, we didn't want to put the local organizations in danger, so we moved the organization. And we looked at each other, a bunch of us, and I finally said to them, wait a minute, I've seen women who've been trafficked in the UK, in London. Why don't we open this program in London? So we did. And it took a while because we worked with the Imperial Business School to open the program. And I worked with that program, Hera UK, for a number of years, actually 12, until I was really burnt out. And one of the women that we trained there, Yohanan, or Mimi as they call her in London, came from the area of Nigeria where there was ethnic cleansing, and most of the women were raped, most of the families had their houses burned down, uprooted, and she made it to the UK, and she was already quite well educated, and I met her mother when I went to work with on the area of project in Boko Haram's territory. But her mother was still in Nigeria, actually helping women as a midwife nurse at a center. Well, Mimi is now getting her doctorate in business in England, and she's also she was trained in our program that we opened in London, and that allowed her to get into graduate school again because it gave her a kind of segue. And today, while she's getting her doctorate, she's also the one in charge of the program in London. So I think that's really cool to have somebody who really knows what the score is. So that was one of our many very heartening stories in London of women who had been trafficked, and then they did the entrepreneurship training, and they found ways to get back into their profession or to get into a new profession or to do other things, and they're all over London doing really great work, and they wear the yellow scarves. That's what we give them at graduation. As I said, after 12 years of working with the program, I was pretty burnt out of being at the end of the program. And I had started earlier with a friend of my husband's who had been from the International Finance Corporation of opening a program to prevent trafficking in the countries from which many of the women came. So we started working in Georgia and Armenia. Eventually we expanded to Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine. And we stopped doing it in Romania when the EU took over and started giving out grants. We're always really happy when people copy us and we can back out. But we continued, and I really found working at the front end of the problem to prevent trafficking is a lot more rewarding. And it's also really important to work with these women because so much is going on that could really explode, and it's really important to have their expertise and support. So in Georgia, last year actually, we gave a grant to two young women, Tamta and her cousin Tiona. They started a manufacturing firm in Tbilisi in 2017. And they sell mainly to businesses, so business to business. And they employ 10 women, most of whom are under the age of 30. Now, they haven't been trafficked, but they are employing women who would not have, young women who would not have a job otherwise, and who would probably decide to undertake dangerous migration because you can only live without a job for so long. And they recently, they asked us to finance a large industrial sewing machine, which of course we did. And they decided, they were asked then to produce the recent, if you look at any of the press on Georgia, there have been recent mass protests there in Tbilisi against what's called the Russian law, which would shut down NGOs, and which is a law we're going to have to deal with. And they were asked to produce the EU flag that you will see in those protests. So they were produced by one of our Hera entrepreneurs. We also supported women during COVID, and the story that Paul tells is actually we were there when COVID was still very in progress.
We were told that Georgia had no COVID, and we got off the plane, and they said it was one of the reddest areas in the world.
Well, we masked, and we passed out masked. Anyhow, and we were lucky to have been vaccinated. When we went to Armenia, the women, there was only 2% vaccination rates in Armenia, and the Iranians were coming because the Armenians weren't interested in getting vaccines, so the Iranians were coming to get the vaccines in Armenia. And as you know, it was a really bad pandemic in Armenia. We supported some women all throughout COVID by celebrating those who managed to keep their ventures open and really keep communities alive and well. And we had planned to give out 3 small prizes. We had so many good applications of what people were doing that we ended up giving 10 and telling everybody else they were wonderful. We just didn't have the funds for the rest, unfortunately. And we had to have a major decision recently when Ukraine blew up. When we went there in 2021 November, we thought it was one of the most wonderful places to be at that moment in Kyiv. And it just seemed like such a vibrant society that everything was working really well. And in my report, the last line I wrote, "It was a wonderful experience, but I wondered if this was a cabaret moment." 3 months later. So one of the things that was really tough is we lost contact for a bit, but we sent out word through everybody that if they wanted to become refugees, if they wanted to migrate to Europe or to North America, we would help. And we ended up helping 25 families and more than 50 people resettle throughout Europe and in North America. And in fact, Nancy Contel really helped, an architect who resettled in Texas. So, and she's doing well because she plans to go back to Kyiv when she can help to rebuild her country. But some of the women have stayed, and we've been giving grants to women in Ukraine, including one that I really think is wonderful, Yulia Azrin. She opened Trust Pizza in Kyiv. She was a lawyer by training, and she used to practice law, but as she said, there wasn't much law for her to practice when the war started. So she opened, over time, over a year, she opened 3 pizza, hamburger takeouts, and eventually a restaurant that she says I have to come and eat at. We gave them 2 ovens for their pizza operation, and she employs over 30 young women and men, and they help feed the troops as well. So we have many more stories, but just tell me. There's so many different kinds of grants we give out, everything from people who are helping with finance, who are helping farmers do their taxes. We give out grants for manufacturing, for food processing. We give a lot of STEM, as we call science, technology, engineering, and math type grants. But it's amazing what these women are doing. And I think what COVID really taught me is they are the backbone that keeps everything going when things get rough.
We're going to open up for questions in about 10 minutes. For us, our friends in Georgia right now are dealing with this horrible administration, the Georgia Dream, which, potentially will kick hair out of Georgia. And I screened a film in Kyiv 34 years ago, and it's astounding to me that it's a war zone now. Grace made flyers, which I believe you all got as you walked in. HARA is a really amazing organization, and any support that we can get would be very much appreciated. And obviously afterwards you can talk to Lynel about the organization. But this is our 50th reunion. I don't know about you, but when I think about 50, I go, what? So I thought I'd ask Lynel one question, not about being a woman at Williams. We'll let that for the next panel.
Read Grace's essay.
But is there anything about your experience as a Williams student that connects you to your life afterwards?
Well, definitely. I would say that many Williams friends who have shown up and been involved in the important times of my life, not just in my work, but in other aspects of my life. And unfortunately, 3 very close friends who are no longer with us. I would say also the 2 professors, or actually 3 professors, Gaudino, of course, Tauber, and Charlie Baer. And, I managed to stay in contact with Gaudino for a year after we graduated, which, of course, as you know, was the year he died. And Tauber, we managed to see him in our 40th reunion, which was really nice. We were hoping to see him in the 50th. And Charlie Baer, who I always kind of keep in contact with.
Yeah, I just talked to him a couple of days ago,
yeah. And of course, rowing with George Marcus started me on. That's something that's really been important in my life. Thanks to these reunions, I've met some great Williams women in my class and alums from other classes. I knew Williams women who were younger or older than me, but I didn't know anyone, or 1 or 2, maybe 2 or 3 people at most. Not so well either, women from my class. So I really appreciate what Grace has done to bring us all together. And I think there are moments when Williams kind of pops up on you. When I was preparing to go into Bosnia the first time, the person in charge at AID pulled me aside. He said, "You didn't really go to Williams, did you?" And I said, why? He said, well, I did too. So anyhow, I think, yeah. So what about you, Paul?
About Williams?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. You know, my friend Billy Fleming is out in the back row over there. And before I went to Williams College, I was going to be a lawyer, and I didn't have a creative bone in my body as far as I could tell. And Billy, along with Joe Mulholland, who I'm going to see in a couple of days, is a fabulous jazz pianist. And you guys, some of you may remember the program that Joe and I did 5 years ago, with Joe doing some of his jazz compositions. But they formed a band, and nobody had a bass guitar, and I figured it was only 4 strings. How hard could it be? I think Bob Kaus is probably out in the audience, somebody who actually knew how to play bass. And I cannot believe that, Billy, you guys didn't kick me out of the band, because I was the worst bass player in the history of music. You know, but it was that experience that really opened up a different world for me. And even though I ended up getting a doctorate in political science, it was always in the back of my mind. And I think even though I played in a bunch of bands, including some really good bands in New Orleans, that led directly into making films. You know, because as much of a not very good bass player as I was, I could become a halfway decent filmmaker, and led to 40 plus years of making documentary films, mostly about American politics. So I can trace that back to the Williams experience. But I think, you know, for all of us here, we were very lucky in that when we graduated, the economy was much more flexible. And I'm sure you've gone through this with your kids. You know, I ran the film program at the University of Texas for over 25 years. And the kids today, the economic situation is much different. They're much more worried about where they're going to be able to get jobs. So we were really lucky, so I could screw around and go to graduate school and then do something completely different. So I guess I owe that all to Williams College. You know, and you know, as Lynel said, a lot of our friends have passed away from our band. Steve Golub, who you saw in a picture up there, just passed away a year or so ago. Dave Rosenblatt, oh gosh, you know, Joe Goodman, Bart Brown, Bill Gibson. Claude Kreiner wasn't in our class, but God, what an amazing musician. So we're going to open this up to questions. One last thing. Billy has put together a band. This is an informal band, and Lynel and I walked over last night to the Congregational Church, and if you look at the front of the church and then look at the back, there's a door that's wide open near the back of the church, and the band is great. It also has Andy Hollinger, who was in our class, and they're playing tonight and the next night. And so after you're done with your dinner with Maud and the memorial service, I highly recommend you walk over because they're fabulous, and they'll be playing. Billy, when will you be playing tonight?
Tonight, right at 7, and we are attributing the great musical groups that played in Chapin Hall during our time here at Williams. We're doing a tribute to them, and bring along your dancing shoes, because there will be dancing.
Can you do a tribute to Charlie Mingus? When Mingus played here, his microphone was turned out, and everybody was scared to turn it back on, and so I crawled out on the stage, turned his mic on, and Mingus looked at me and goes, "Get the fuck off the stage." So I can see people out there. Do we have any questions for Lynel? Right.
Or Paul.
Whatever, yeah. So right in the middle, we got 2 people. So one. And say who you are. Oh my God, Ken, how you doing?
Lynel, my supposition is that you've been Lynel being Lynel all this time. And those of us who don't know you wonder, how does Lynel do Lynel? Because of the situation you've been in. Something guides you that probably feels normal to you. And I'm just wondering, how would you describe what guides you in all of this?
Well, I think Grace alluded to it. When I first went into Bosnia, I was right after that. Actually, during that period, I was pregnant with my second child, and I thought, if I had known that the world was this tough, I don't think I would have had her. And I had been interviewing rape victims for the State Department. When I came back, I did have the second child. I basically worked right up until I was in labor, because I felt like the world was so tough. I had to make it better for these two daughters I had brought into the world. And at the time, I remember I stopped work on Friday. On Monday, I was in labor at home. I decided to have a home birth, which was probably a better idea for various reasons. And I got a call from the teams in Sarajevo, and they said to me, "Oh, we understand you're working from home." I said, "Yeah, I am." You might say that, I'm in labor. And they said, "Oh, we should hang up." I said, "No, come on, Jerry, you're a nurse. I'm between contractions." So anyhow, I brought Cordelia into the world, and my boss called me up. He goes, "Listen, Long, you don't have a choice. You're back in here." I go, "But I just had a baby." He goes, "You bring her in." And my Republican lawyer, conservative boss let me breastfeed that child for 4 months in the State Department so that I could keep the programs going. Well, many, many years later, I met the women who were in labor at the same time I was in Sarajevo, and I think that's a very humbling experience to realize what they went through.
But something in you says yes for some reason. And I'm just curious how you would describe that, because from the outside, I think it looks like you're going into things that normally we'd be fearful of. And somehow you're saying yes, and I'm just wondering if you could put a voice to that.
Well, I'm definitely fearful. I mean, there's no question. I mean, when there's a grenade goes over my head, I'm fearful. I'm down on the floor. I mean, that's, it's very scary. I think it's the people I work with and their humanity. And also, as I said, when you're thinking about the next generation a bit, you have to do a little bit more to make this world something better,
And Jim, I'll get to you in a second, but Lynel's daughters are also amazing. So it's good that they came into this world. They both speak 10 languages, don't they?
Well, one speaks a lot of languages, and the other says she doesn't, but I've heard her yell at taxi cabs in Arabic, so I think she does.
That counts. So next to Ken Cassell is Jim Gasparini. You might have seen that amazing picture of Jim in the video, surrounded by a circle of people. So.
Oh, wow, yes. Yeah.
You buy for me? You buy for me?
Yes.
Your organization here reminds me to some extent of Kiva, and I'm wondering if you could talk about the similarities and differences. And the other question is, I remember back in the day, 50-some years ago, people talking about majors and anthropology would come up and would say, "What can you do with a degree in anthropology?" And I wonder if you could speak about how that informed your experience.
Well, okay. I'll start with Kiva. Kiva is a great organization, and people do get Kiva grants after HERA grants. I think Kiva loans, actually, after HERA grants. I think one of the biggest differences in terms of what we do is we work with not startups, because we decide that the woman has to have some skin in the game and has to really have some customers or some clients. But we really do work with ventures or entrepreneurs who other organizations don't work with, because they're at the very bottom of the sort of food chain, I would say, in entrepreneurship. And Kiva does much more with groups of women and also with loans. And it's great if the a Kiva program can come out of a HERA program, but even with some of our entrepreneurs, they've gone on to get major loans from banks and businesses, and also from the major organizations such as the European Union. So it's a bit different. It's a different niche. And the way we do it is we don't give out money. We don't give out working capital unless we really have to. We go there, the woman says, "I need this piece of equipment to make my business better." And then we go with her and she picks out the equipment. So that also helps the local economy. If she can't get that equipment there, for example, we realized that the dairy farms in Georgia needed vacuum packaging, and there were dairy cooperatives of women working together. So we got the initial vacuum packaging in from Germany, the German who was overseeing the program in Georgia for us. And as dairy farmers say in Georgia, Nico, the guy who did this, revolutionized the cheese industry in Georgia with this vacuum packaging. So we really give out equipment. We don't generally give out money, but we give out the equipment that the woman chooses, and then we also give them the chance to go and pick the equipment, choose it for themselves, and often they will put in their own capital towards the equipment. But I think the biggest thing that HERA does is the recognition. So many women have said to us, look, it wasn't that much, but you were the first person who told me I was okay, that I could be an entrepreneur. And then when we had a meeting recently in Moldova, this woman said, my husband didn't believe in me, my mother didn't believe in me, but you guys believed in me. And they said, when I got that grant, everybody stepped aside and said, okay, you can be an entrepreneur.
Do you remember when we went up to that, to the valley that you gave me the article after we got there that said it was the Harvard Graduate School of Islamic Militants?
Oh, I knew if I gave it to him before, he wouldn't go with me.
No. It was amazing. It was really, truly amazing.
Beautiful.
But we gave money to that woman who had a little bake shop, and she wanted money for a motorcycle, so she would be the first Muslim woman on a motorcycle delivering.
Well, no, first she said to us that I can't take, my husband will use the motorcycle. You won't mind because he's going to deliver all my products. I go, no, you have to ride the motorcycle. And then her mother-in-law, this was so cool, said to her, look, your aunt was the first woman to ride a tractor. You
Right.
can ride a motorcycle.
That logic led to a complete social change in that area. So we have another 10 minutes. So
I have to answer the question about anthropology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I can't say that. I've studied political economy, economics, and anthropology. And I mean, yeah, all of them have been great. They've really, informed my understanding of situations. So.
Question over there.
What are the principal sources of your funding?
Mainly private individuals. The only money we've taken from governments is from the British Commission. We took a little bit, mostly they gave us the space. But we don't tend to take from governments because the reporting requirements are so onerous. We don't take from the European Union because so we get it from, sometimes we get it from companies, their social responsibility programs. And we're all volunteers, so that's a big issue. We keep the overhead costs really low because of that. I decided that early in the beginning that we should really, for the most part, stick with being volunteers. We do have some consultants we pay for specific tasks now and again. And I remember when the first group of HERA women came on board, and I was sitting with the dean of Imperial Business School, and she got up in front of the next group and she said, listen, ladies, I want to tell you, these are the first people who aren't trafficking off our backs. So it is really important, I think, to really kind of be in the trenches that way and to be a volunteer still. But it is a very tough way to go, because people burn out. It's, and we do pay for the costs that they incur from their trips.
Down here?
Lynel, one thing that impresses me about HERA is that it seems very sustainable. So I'd like to know how you identify beneficiaries and what support you provide to various cohorts in terms of training and mentoring, if it's an ongoing program.
Did everybody hear that question?
No. HERA has been very successful in terms of the long-term sustainability and success of its beneficiaries. So I asked how she determines or they identify beneficiaries, and I'm also interested in the overall structure of HERA. Does it provide mentoring, training, and how long a cohort stays together?
Right, that's a good question. Basically, when we've just gotten 160 applications online now. We didn't used to do this online, but we screen the initial applications from the countries, and then we have assessment teams that go out and actually meet the women. And together with the women, this is what astonishes everybody, they buy the products on the spot So there's no long-term overhead. We do report writing about why we bought it and why we chose those women to support. The way we do, a lot of the people when they go out, the assessment teams, they become friends with some of the women, and we also introduce them to each other. So they help each other. There's a lot of peer-to-peer mentoring going on. And there's also a lot of the assessment teams become long-term friends. Some of our assessors are entrepreneurs themselves, so they know how hard it is to do what these women are doing. We also have lawyers on the team. We have bankers. A lot of bankers take it as their summer holiday, which is very nice of them, to go on an assessment trip. And I think they're always astonished about how efficient we are. So I think efficiency is huge. It's really important. But the other way we've really become sustainable, and I think this is incredibly important, is that other organizations have copied our model, including the Georgian government. I don't know about the current one, but yeah, I don't think so, actually. But anyhow, other organizations, we've worked with British Petroleum on developing their model like this. They don't necessarily reach the same people, but they also always are willing to collaborate because we're not in competition. We're really helping each other. Yeah.
In the middle, and then we'll get to over there. So.
Hi, I'm Andrea, and I'm a sidekick here. But my question is about what advice you would give to. I have a 26-year-old daughter who just came back from teaching in Bulgaria on a fellowship for 2 years. And while she was there, she really got in touch with the Roma community, and she ended up volunteering every week and teaching English to Roma high school students as well as the ones that she was teaching during the day. But she felt like the people in the Fulbright office would not be supportive of that, and so she kept that a secret from them. And my question is, and now she's back and looking for where she goes to next, what advice would you give to a young person, a woman, who is a world citizen and is fiercely committed to fiercely committed to contributing to a broader, deeper, and more loving humanity?
Well, I think she knows what to do already. I mean, well, that goes without saying. I never expected my daughters to listen to me. In fact, I'm surprised when they quote me once in a while. But I think she knows what she's doing. She'll find her way. She really will. You know, just have confidence. Just tell her, you know, you'll figure it out. And I'm sure there's tons of work she could be doing. It's really sad that the Fulbright didn't, but maybe write it up. If she writes it up, that might help her think. That's a great idea. Yeah.
We had a question right over here. Yeah.
Could you explain the cause and the process of human trafficking, particularly women and children, in areas that you have visited and helped? And how would we or the government of that particular country stop that?
Okay, it's very complex. I've written a lot about it, but I would say, okay, there's a few causes. One is the demand, of course. As long as there's a demand and people are desperate, there's going to be a supply. So that's my economics training. For low-cost prostitution in the case of, or low-cost exploitation of labor of all kinds, not just prostitution, but, you know. So I would say, in terms of stopping human trafficking, I think that women need to have alternatives, and that's why we do HERA, that women who are vulnerable to dangerous migration can find a job that's meaningful to them, not a dead-end job that goes nowhere, or they're not paid enough, where they're pretty much already exploited. The other thing is I'm realizing more and more in Ukraine, the war again, and I saw this in Thailand, I saw this in Bosnia. War creates the demand for people to migrate, and smugglers and traffickers take advantage of that. So that's why it was so important to us, at least to reach out to the 60 Ukrainian grantees that we had supported. At least we could support the group we had been working with. The other thing is, I think it's really important to shine a light on the fact that governments are always somewhat complicit, but that's really hard for those inside the government, inside the country to do. But there is not trafficking without government complicity. So, and it's also a very dangerous business. I had to basically get my children out of Bosnia because of trafficking, shining a light on trafficking and irregular migration. But I think trafficking is a really tough thing to address, and I think the best way is to give women in the communities the power to help stop it themselves. That's the idea behind HERA.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay, we have time for 2 questions. Okay, where? Oh, right down there. Okay, sure.
Thank you very much. This has been spectacular. An unsolicited plug for Paul's recent documentary about journalism in small town Texas. It was spectacular and important work. Shifting to this hemisphere, we have problems with refugees. Can you give any perspective on what organizations are doing to assist the Venezuelan women and Central American women who are coming to this country?
I haven't lived in the U.S. for years, so I don't think, there are many organizations, but I know that UNHCR has done phenomenal work. My brother and my now new son-in-law's brother is actually working with Venezuelan refugees in Colombia. If you don't have to become a refugee, that's always the best solution. So, of course, the best solution would be to work within Venezuela to address some of the conditions that are causing those migrations, but that's tough. It doesn't happen overnight.
Ellen?
We should change American policy so that people don't, our policy towards Central America and other places over decades has not been hopeful and is also helping to promote large flows of refugees. So there is, we need to think on both sides, the humanitarian side, and also as citizens of this country, we're not all powerful, but there are things we should look at to help, stem the tide. I don't need to talk or give a lecture on American policy towards Central and South America, but these just a little injection.
And we've got a person up there who's been raising his hand.
You've got a really good memory. To put a spin on Paul's question, put yourself back 50 years ago this weekend, a couple hundred yards from here, where we're sitting out in front of Baxter and Chapin graduating. If somebody asked you as you were sitting there, what do you think you're going to do after Williams with your life or your education, what would your answer have been?
Oh my gosh. Well, that day I was mostly concerned about how I would get to Maine. I know, I should have asked you, but actually there was somebody from my class whose family took me to Maine with them because I had to start 2 days later as a Maine state legal intern with the sheriff's office. So.
Your mom wasn't going to give you a ride?
No, she went back to Washington, D.C. My parents were going through a rough divorce, so yeah.
I see Larry Peltz over there, and I'm also remembering Bob Andruzzi, who passed away. It's, it's interesting, folks, this being 50 years since we're here. I want to thank Grace and the organizing people over here to think about having Lynel as one of the people that we're focusing on. And I'm sure that some of you have other questions about HERA and her, and so please come up to her afterwards to talk about that. But otherwise, thank you so much to have such a large turnout today.